quickly or something. Yeah. Is that better? Can it? Is it on? Okay, excellent. It's good to see everyone. We thank you for being here. We appreciate it very much. We are in Isaiah chapter 5. So please open your Bibles to Isaiah 5. The sheets that you normally get are being passed out now, so you can add them to your booklet. So were there any other prophets contemporary to Isaiah? We're going to get to that. Yes, there were two other prophets. What were they? Micah and Amos. All right? Hosea comes very soon after Isaiah. All right, so were there other prophets other than the prophets of God?
The false prophets.
The false prophets. Let's think for just a minute. Let's put ourselves in their shoes for just a minute. How did you know who was a false prophet and who was the prophet of God?
Their prophecy didn't come true if they were false.
Jesus said you have to test them to know whether their prophecies will come true or not. And if they do, then what happens? They are the true prophet. What if their prophecies don't come true? Now, do the false prophets, were they good at it? What would a false prophet do to be good at it?
Tell the people what they wanted.
First and foremost, tell the people what they want to hear. Because if you expect them to accept what you're saying, it's what they want to hear. Yes, Brian.
Aligned with that, they gained political advantage by telling the king what the king wanted to hear.
All right.
And it made them very popular with the
All right. Once you get popular with the people, you're going to be able to get into the king? Yeah, most likely, because he's going to accept you as a prophet. And what else? What?
It'd be vague.
They would be very vague. They would say things that could be done either way. They would say things that you couldn't pin them down on. They would cry, peace, 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 as the scripture says, but they wouldn't tell you a timetable or what specific might happen or all of those things. Does God get specific through the prophets? Absolutely he does. And he gives opportunity for the people to understand that the prophecy and the prophet is from God. Isaiah was from God. Was he positive or negative? It's a one-word answer and it has 3 letters. Yes. He was both, wasn't he? He was very negative to that generation because they were sinning, following after their own will. But he was very positive with what God gave them in hope. Now, they didn't know the timetable of the hope, did they? No, they didn't. And so, therefore, they didn't know it was going to be, 700 years later. But nevertheless, they could have hope in their life, even though they were being chastised or disciplined at the time. All right, quickly in Matthew, Jesus talks about this a little bit. He says, beware of the false prophets. What's the word beware? Be aware, yeah, well, have knowledge of them and stay away. If your mother says, beware of the hot stove, what does she mean? Go put your hand on it just to test it out? No, she doesn't mean that. Although most children do what? Do that very thing. All right, would people buy into the false prophets maybe because God said don't? Oh, there's some people like that, of course. Nevertheless, beware of these false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. How do they dress up? Sheep's clothing. What are they really? Ravenous wolves. Yes, very good way to put it. Do we have some, what do we call them, fables or nursery rhymes like that? We do, don't we? The concept, even in man's world, is this. But inwardly, they're ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. What's a fruit? What? Their works. What they do. What they produce. If a tree is a peach tree, it's going to produce peaches of its kind. If a false prophet is a false prophet, he's going to produce lies, deceit, all kinds of things that are not true. All right? Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears what? Good fruit. Every bad tree bears what? Bad fruit. A tree cannot produce bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. So what's a false prophet going to produce? Lies and deceit. Bad. He's going to produce bad. What's a prophet of God going to produce? Truth and good, if you listen to him and follow after him. So then you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, who's the me here? Jesus, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, what day is he talking about? Final judgment? When did the rich man start complaining? As soon as he was in Hades, didn't he? He spoke up immediately. Will people speak up immediately to the Lord if they think they've been falsely accused? Yeah, they will. Will the Lord have an answer for them? Yes, he will. And what will be the answer? Yes, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons, in your name perform many, many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. What does it mean to practice lawlessness?
Not following God.
Not following the law. Yeah, God. Good question. And I don't know. I can give you some ideas. It's not explained to us. So these are just thoughts and ideas. Were there times when Satan had power? Was he granted power from somebody? Yeah. Who granted him power? Yes.
Well, Job is an example of that.
Yes. God granted him the ability to do something. God granted him the permission to do something. I believe this is talking about a false concept of a miracle from Satan himself. Now, whether these were really miracles or the deceit of false prophets, I'm not sure. I don't think it's explained. But if you take the word for the exact definition, they would be miracles, yes.
Kind of like Simon the sorcerer.
Yes. Now, Simon the sorcerer, of course, was a deceiver. He was a magician. He was sleight of hand. I doubt these were sleight of hand. Yes?
Well, if Peter hadn't repented, he'd be one of those.
Yeah, to some degree.
It could be some of the saints. Well, there were many saints that fell away.
Yes?
So if they had laid on of hands, they might have had a miracle or something they could have done.
Yes.
But if they chose to fall away,
Yeah. That's a good point, because the church was given what? Spiritual gifts, miracles. And if they stopped doing the will of God and still had the miracle, could they do false miracles? Of course they could. Yeah. Great point. Yes, Vicki.
You know that one prophet that, I can't ever remember who's who, but the prophet who was not supposed to eat, and then the other prophet came to him and said, oh no, you're supposed to eat. And then he got killed.
Yes.
So.
The old prophet versus the young prophet.
How did the old prophet know what was going on?
If,
And is there demons in the Old Testament? Because in the New Testament, the demon that was in the girl kept saying, he's from God, he's from God.
yes.
So could it be demons in the Old Testament? But it never mentions demons in the Old Testament.
Okay, we're going to stop and do this for 8 weeks. No. The short question is, absolutely there were demons in the Old Testament.
It never mentions them.
And prophets like, it does mention them actually, I'll get some verses for you.
Okay.
Prophets like Balaam.
Yes,
Balaam did what?
because
He spoke for God, but all the time working behind the scenes to see if he could get money against God, against God's people. So this old prophet, new prophet thing, which is a fascinating story to me, because the young prophet goes to the king and he's fearless. And he stands before the king at risk of death. And then when it's all over and he's let his guard down, here comes a false prophet who used to be a prophet of God. He was an old prophet of God. But he has a preset thing that he wants for himself, a selfish idea in his head. And so he goes to this young prophet and convinces him to come back and eat. Why did the lion, or sent by God, I believe, why did the lion kill the young prophet? Yes.
disobeyed.
Disobedience. You see, he was a...
How could it be confused like that?
Well, he let his guard down, didn't he? He thought, well, this is a guy who's a prophet of God. I should listen to him. He should have said to himself, I'm the prophet of God. God has given me perfect instructions. One of them, don't stop and eat, go home. But he didn't.
And how easy it is to be deceived.
It is.
Easy.
Very easy to be deceived. Satan is good at this. We have to have that understanding. Satan is so good at this that he's gotten every one of us. Anybody raise their hand and say, Brian's got his up. Anybody raise their hand and say he hasn't gotten you? Brian, go.
This is very similar. God had already made it known to that young prophet.
Yes. Yes.
That was the end of the conversation.
Yes.
It's very similar to Balak and Balaam.
Yes.
You know, Balaam had been told by God, do not, go with them. Do not prophesy or curse Israel. I have blessed Israel. That's the end of the story.
And who actually told him? A donkey told him. If you get any dumber than that, it's a donkey that told him.
An angel was standing in the waiting to
Yes.
slay him.
Yes.
Because God had already made his will known, and he
Yes.
thought, okay, well, I'll go with Balak and try again.
Yes.
3 times.
Yep.
And the donkey, through miraculous things, spoke to him and said, "There's an angel ready to kill you."
God said to Balaam, you will not curse my people. And he couldn't. He wouldn't. He said good things every time. Yeah. He does go home and come back, though, and show Balak how to destroy them by sin. And he is killed for that later. All right, so to your question, demons are there, Satan is there, God has allowed them to roam the earth. Are they any different today than they were in the Old Testament? I believe they absolutely are. I think that as Satan has fallen from heaven, that he and they have less power than they used to have. Who has caused that to happen? Jesus Christ our Lord. Through his victory, these things were restricted, and these things were overcome. And it's to our advantage they were overcome.
And he mentioned Job.
Yeah.
And Satan says, as I went back and forth across the earth, I noticed Job.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Of course, he also noticed him because God was bragging on him. As he come up to him, God gives him a little brag. Have you seen my servant Job? I'm not sure I ever want God to mention my name. Yes.
Since you brought up God bragging, what about when God finally told Balaam, go ahead and go? Was that sarcasm?
Yes. Because Balaam knew very well what would happen to him. Yes, Brad.
We look at this in the Old Testament and these things maybe in this New Testament, but we still have to be aware and look out for them today.
Yeah.
Jude, in his letter to the churches, identifies those who followed the sin of Balaam and Korah and Cain.
Yes. Peter mentions them in 2 Peter. Jude mentions them. These are all examples for us because they're still threats. These things are still threats, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Something that we need to beware of, false prophets. Okay, as we begin then in chapter 5, what we have, some commentators want to call it a song, others want to call it a parable. I don't care what you call it. Isaiah has written it so that we and they might have some understanding of the relationship between God and his people at this moment, at this time, and how disappointed God is at this time. Do you want to disappoint God? When do you learn the concept of disappointing somebody? A child. A child learns very early that it's, first of all, not in his best interest to disappoint his parents, but secondly, there's an emotion to it, is there not? Absolutely. There's an overwhelming emotion when you disappoint your parents, when you cause something to happen or you do something and they are disappointed in you. So, is it in our interest not to disappoint God? Of course it is. Absolutely it is. But God's people have so disappointed him, as he points out in this chapter, especially at the beginning of this chapter, that he has decided severe discipline is what he will bring. Now, if your child disappoints you in a small way, what would you do? Don't do that again. With the stern face, and my dad had a look, my mom had a paddle. It all worked, you know. a strong discipline. God is going to a point where he's going to tear it all down and let them build it back later. But he's going to tell them he's going to let them build it back later. What does that become to them? A hope. Who is he giving the hope to?
Future generations.
Generations to come, the people for that time as well, though. But he's giving it to the remnant. Now, why would he give it to the remnant?
Because they're following him.
All right. If you're being righteous and you didn't disappoint, what happens is the mom can't get anybody to tell her who did it, and so she spanks all three of you. That ever happened to you? It happened to me. Yeah. But you didn't do anything. But you have an understanding to some degree as the remnant that this is necessary, isn't it? Probably not for years later, but nevertheless, you get an understanding that this is necessary. All right. So God is going to give a grave discipline upon them. But let's read about his vineyard. Let me, who's the me here? The me here is Isaiah. He's written the poem. He's written the parable or the song, however you want to put it. Let me sing now for my beloved, a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. Who's who here? If you don't get who's who here right up front, you're never going to understand the song or the parable. Yes, Brad?
The vineyard is the nation of Israel.
Yes.
Much as Paul did in his letter, saying, if I could be accursed and save all my brothers, in paraphrase here, I would do that. I would sacrifice something. I could just bring all of my brothers into the Lord.
He was willing to give up everything he had because he loved his nation, wasn't he? Yes, Brian.
I believe the owner is God.
Yeah.
God is the owner of the vineyard. And
Yes.
I think, and just
We have a parable much like this that Jesus said.
I think the watchtower is the temple of God.
Yeah, it is. Okay, let's go on then. So, let me, Isaiah, now sing for my beloved. I believe he wrote this song for God. My beloved. A song of my beloved concerning the beloved of both him and God is Israel. All right. So he has wrote a song for God to Israel, and Israel is God's vineyard in the song. What's a vineyard? A place you get grapes. But it's also the crop that produces fruit, is it not? All right. So who planted this crop? God planted this crop. Where did he plant it? In Israel or Canaan, and he gave them the land. And what did he expect them to produce in the land? Good, which is their fruit, which is the fruit of God. Good. What are they producing now? Bad. Is that the fruit of God? That's not the fruit of God in any way, is it? So the vineyard has turned bad, and God wants them to know they've turned bad, and he's disappointed in them. And he's disappointed that his vineyard has gone to, well, you fill out the blank, I guess, but it's gone to ugly. It's no longer good. It turned to bad, and now it's gone to ugly. All right, let's continue. My well-beloved, I believe that's God, had a vineyard. Did he give it opportunity, the vineyard? The well-beloved. Yes, he did. He helped them destroy all of those they would fight against. Did he not? He wanted them to destroy all of those in the land. Did they? They did not. Was it ever a problem for them? Always a problem for them. Because again, they were influenced for idols and idolatry and bad based on the nations that were still around them. But what God did for the vineyard first, number one, he built it on a fertile hill. He didn't start it off in the desert, in the wilderness. He built it on a fertile hill. Should this have given the vines in the vineyard opportunity? Of course it would. They could grow rather well there. Then he dug it all around. What does that mean, dig it all around? Pardon? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Pruned
Yeah, he's going to get to the pruned and hosed, but right now, as he's picked the fertile hill, he's going to dig all around the fertile hill. What does that mean? What do you do for a crop before you plant it? You plow it, you turn the soil up, you try to make the place for the seed to be able to what? To germinate, to grow, to start life. And so that's exactly what he did. He gave it, he dug it all around. He removed all the stones. Why is that important? Yes, the stones are not going to be to the advantage of the vineyard. They're going to be to the disadvantage of the vineyard. If you want a fertile, good crop, you need land that is prepared. You need a fertile soil. Do we have a parable like that? Parable of the sower? Yeah, 4 different soils. Which one was successful? How many were successful? Just one. One was successful because it was well prepared. God started Israel off well prepared. Has he done anything for us? Has he started it off well prepared? He has, if we'll take advantage of it. All right? And planted it with the choicest vines. Now, did he go out and get the weakest and the ugliest vines that he could find to save money? The choicest vines. What does that mean? A very strong plant. The strongest that were available. And God supported them so that they would be this strong. The choicest of the plants. So if you had all of this in your vineyard, would you be expecting something good or bad? Something very good. You would expect a beautiful vineyard. You're looking forward to the crop. You can't wait for the grapes that are going to be overwhelming. Did God get some out of his vineyard? Oh, yes, he did. He got some beautiful crops out of his vineyard in the beginning. How about now in Isaiah's day? There's the remnant. And there's 2 of the 4 kings that were what? Fairly good. You could do the third one as half and half maybe, but then there's the evil one. All right? So he's going to get some good out of the vineyard. But he goes on to say, then he built a tower in the middle of it. What's that mean? Protection. That's what a tower was for. A tower not only was for protection, but it also usually had the storage area for the grapes so they would be safe. So we're talking about safety and protection for the crop, for the fruit that was produced. And so therefore God gave him that tower right in the middle of the vineyard so they would have the protection. Who was in the middle? Brian got this. Who was in the middle, Brian, of Israel in Jerusalem? God was. In the most holy place, right there in the temple. God's presence was there protecting them. He wanted a vineyard that would produce good fruit, and he was willing to sacrifice to get it started right, and he was willing to stay with them and protect them. When did he leave the temple? When they left him and Ezekiel. Ezekiel has the description of them leaving the temple. He tells them exactly how God got up. And he went to the edge of the holy place and he waited. And then he went to the threshold and then he went to the gate and then he disappeared. He was gone. He wasn't there anymore. Why did he do that? They had already left him. He had turned away from him. His vineyard was ugly. His vineyard had turned ugly. It had turned abandoned. Have you ever seen an abandoned vineyard? I've seen many of them. I used to work in my grandfather's vineyard. I used to have to tie vines, flip trays. I never cut grapes. They always hired people for that. But if you kept the vineyard up and you did what was necessary for the vine, what did you end up with? A beautiful crop. An absolutely beautiful crop that produced beautiful fruit. God gave Israel every chance for that, did he not? Does he give us every chance for the same today? He does. He gives the entire world that. There are some abandoned vines. There are some very beautiful vines. We need to be the beautiful vines. Then he expected it to produce good grapes. Is that an unreasonable expectation by God? Why not? I mean, come on, we're just but dust. We can't do what God did or Jesus Christ did. We're not them. Why would he expect such high standards from us?
Because he's given us what we need.
Because of the advantage that he's given the vineyard should be able to produce good grapes. Yes?
To paraphrase, and we're going to get into it in a minute, verse 4, God is basically through the prophet saying, what else could I have done?
Yes.
What more could I have done?
Isn't he? He's asking that question by example, isn't he? By singing this song to them or giving them this parable, he's really asking them, make your own conclusion here. You need to think. Let's reason together is what, who said that? Through Isaiah, yes, Brad.
Well, and if he expects that of the natural vine, and Paul in his epistles and the other writers say this, if he expects that of the natural vine, what of those of us who've been grafted in?
Yes. Could we be ungrafted? That's his point. Paul says you could be ungrafted just like they were cut off, and we have to be careful about that, of course. All right, so as we move forward then, what does he say? He says, then he expected good grapes, but it produced what?
Wild grapes.
Only worthless or wild grapes. What's a worthless grape look like?
Little, it's very good tasting, it's not something you want.
All right, for many different reasons, and one of them being here, God's going to cut off the water for the land, but in many different reasons, these grapes never produce size, they never produce sweetness, and many of them shrivel up and die before they ever get ripe. How would you feel if you worked a great much of your life with heavy labor to produce a vineyard, and you had to go somewhere, so you gave it to your son, and when you came back, what did it look like?
Not what you left it.
Using the son's probably a poor analogy, but God called Israel his son many times. Gave it to Israel the son, expecting them to do what? Take care of it, to build it up, not tear it down. False prophets had helped them what? Tear it down, not build it up. Jesus chastised the Jews of his day because he said, you're much like your fathers who killed the prophets. You killed the true prophets and you accepted the false prophets. Do we see that today anywhere when it comes to religious situation? Yeah, we see it all over the world. Do you think the false prophets have outnumbered the true prophets? Spokesmen for God? It happens. In our time, I think it's happened. But it was true in Isaiah's time. 3 prophets? Yes?
One thing you skipped over,
Oh.
I would have really felt
Nail
what
it.
you said about is he dug and chiseled out a vat for the wine in the hard rock.
I did miss that.
And it was a special place for his people, his grapes,
Yes.
and there wasn't any grape juice to pour into.
Yes. A vat. A vat was used for, again, storage. And in many cases, after the grapes were juiced, they would be in these vats or large jugs. And that's where the grape juice would be stored. Is that a protection that God gave them? It is. Another reason why they should have kept their what? Their vineyard and their production in their vineyard for God in his name and not for the false prophets. Yes?
I haven't worked grapes like that, but I've seen growing up, my grandfather lived in this area for a number of years. He had a huge garden.
Yep.
And he did everything like this, and he worked, especially after retirement, he worked it and tilled it and fertilized and grafted, and he had a tree that produced 5 different kinds of apples and all this kind of stuff. But if something didn't work, if it didn't produce the fruit he expected, out it came.
Yes. Why? Was that not right? Yes, he had an expectation, and when it didn't live up to the expectation, it needed to be removed. It was gone. It's the same thing with God. He has expectations. Will he turn his back on those who turn their back on him?
And he gives them all of the chances, like, they have all the breaks. And
Yeah.
they still don't produce.
Every advantage,
Yes.
especially to Israel, every advantage possible God gave them. And he gave them so that they wouldn't have any excuses, so that they could be the people that God wanted them to be. So, as he moves forward, he says, and now, inhabitants of Jerusalem, did I miss something? No, okay. And men of Judah. Inhabitants of Jerusalem and Judah is who he is speaking the song to. Why is he not talking to the 10 tribes of Israel first? They weren't gone yet in time, but God had decided they were gone. God had already made his decision they were gone. God had already decided he was going to divorce them and never bring them back. He would not divorce Jerusalem and Judah because he planned to bring them back. Even though 70 years they would spend in captivity, they will have an opportunity through what king again that God raised up not hundreds, but years before he was born? Cyrus, the Medo-Persian king of Cyrus. And Darius was his helper. And they would bring the people back. All right, so he says then, judge between me and my vineyard. What does that mean? I thought it was his vineyard. Who's the vineyard? Israel. Who's speaking? God. Judge between God and my vineyard. Where was his vineyard now? It was abandoned. It was abandoned by the people. It was a mess. It was ugly. It was torn down. What is he asking them to do? What choice is he asking them to make? Judge between the true prophet and the false prophet. Judge between God and a king that's disobedient to God. Judge between good and evil. Judge between righteousness and sin. Are these choices still ours today? Of course they are. The same choices we have to make that they were making. Judge between me and my vineyard. Choose God or Israel. As it stands now, his vineyard was a mess. What more was there to do for my vineyard than I have not done in it? Could you blame God? Could they say to themselves, well, God didn't do enough, it's his fault? They did. Absolutely they did. But was it true? Of course it wasn't true. God made the case and showed them that he did everything possible that they should have had the advantage, and they didn't take advantage of it. They've made a mess of it. So now let me tell you, the vineyard, Israel, what I am going to do to my vineyard. That is Jehovah, I am there, and that is what? The Trinity. Is Jesus Christ involved in discipline in the Old Testament? As the Word? Sure he is. He's one of the Trinity. Is the Spirit involved? Sure he is. He's one of the Trinity. The Trinity of God was working throughout the Old Testament to carry out the will of God. It was just not God the Father. Jesus is in many examples, as we pointed out last week, how he has worked throughout time. We'll talk more about that in Hebrews chapter 1 when we get there someday. All right. I will remove its hedge. What does it mean to remove a hedge? Yeah, you're taking away the protection. A hedge would keep wild animals out. A hedge would do many things. It would also do something that was very important. A hedge would mark your territory, the boundary of your property, where God was protecting you. If he removed the hedge, he removed his protection. Just like he left the what? He left the temple. In Ezekiel. I will remove its hedge and it will be consumed. The word consumed here is by fire. A loss of protection. Overwhelmed. I will break down its wall. The wall would be in what? would be a wall around the vineyard, but in this case, the wall is more likely to be around the city. Did God have the ability to break down walls on cities? You ever studied the concept of how the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Romans all learned ways to destroy cities? Have you ever seen any of those? You need to find us a YouTube on that. I know he's great at finding YouTubes. They literally would build dirt ramps as high as the wall. Or they would use these giant towers they would build out of wood that were on wheels, and they would roll them up to the wall. Yes?
Okay, that's exactly what they did in the Masada.
It is.
Yeah, they built this giant ramp.
They did it to Tyre and Sidon, too. Tyre and Sidon were always thought to be impenetrable. Yeah, thank you. And the reason is that the cities were all over the coast, but they had this island just off the coast. And so when they were under attack, everybody went to the island, and they had this massive wall around the island. And nobody could get to the island. What did the Babylonians do?
Tore down the city and made a road.
Yeah, they tore down all the buildings that were in the city that got abandoned, and they made a road between the continent and the island, the land and the island. And they walked right over there and took them out. Yes?
Isn't that what makes even that prophecy about Tyre,
Yes.
Sidon and Dance, so amazing to me?
It is.
Because how are they ever going to get it?
Yes.
But God can do anything He says.
He can, and he whistles for whoever he wants, and we're going to see that down the road as well. All right, let's get to this. I will remove its hedge, and it will be consumed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled underground, or trampled ground. Trampled ground, basically, you can imagine thousands of troops marching through and just destroying everything. You can go to Joel and you can see it in a metaphor, I believe, of the locusts that went through the land. And this is exactly what God will use those he whistles for. I will lay it waste. The word waste here is a Negev. Anybody know what a Negev is? It's a desert. What's a desert look like? You want to go live in a desert? What are you going to eat in the desert? Where are you going to find water in the desert? All of these things are scarce in the desert. God gave them a land that was a promised land. What kind of land was it? Did it have water? Flowing with milk and honey. It had plenty of water. It had beautiful soil. It had wonderful climate. Everything God had given, they needed, God had given them. Unfortunately, they're going to turn into a Negev or a desert. It will not be pruned or hoed. What happens to a vineyard if you don't prune it or hoe it? Weeds take over, and the vines don't produce as they should. Yes?
The trampled ground, when it's in a grapevine or in a garden of any kind, if the ground is packed down,
Yes?
the plants can't grow.
They can't grow, and they can't get the water to them, and they're going to be a mess, aren't they? They're going to die out.
And
When I was a young man, my grandmother was always old to me. So I don't know exactly how old she was when she did this. But she was a master at pruning and tying vines. I would start one row and she would start the other one, and she'd be at the end when I was a third of the way through. She was just fantastic at it. So
she had lots of practice.
she did have lots of practice. And she knew, and my grandfather knew, that you had to do these things if you expected to get the proper crop. And if the people stopped doing these things, what kind of crop were they going to produce for God? Brett.
Well, in John 15, I think it is, God talking, Jesus and to the apostles, he says that those vines who produce fruit, he's going to prune.
He is going to prune them.
Yeah, you're going to
Spiritually or physically?
maybe both.
Yes. Spiritually, most likely, in that context. But nevertheless, the point is that God will work with us if we will work with God. And can we produce the kind of grapes that God wants? Absolutely he can. Okay, I will break down its wall, trampled ground, the Negev. I will also charge the clouds to do what? Charge the clouds to rain, no rain on it. Who else could do that? Any prophet could do that?
Elijah could call for it not to happen. But still God is your God.
Only God could do it, and he can only do it through the true prophets that he supported, couldn't he? Absolutely. So if you get no rain, what are you going to do? You're going to let them die. You can't do anything about it. I mean, even in our day today, and we had much like that in Egypt, we can build canals, we can move water around, but at some point in time when there isn't enough water, what happens? They die. Yes, Brad.
In our country's history during the Depression era, we had the area of Oklahoma territory
Yes.
was a giant dust bowl.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there was no rain and the soil got blown away with the wind.
Yep. Yep. We have examples even in our generation. Yes, absolutely. Or the generation maybe before us. He says, for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his delightful plant. God still loved them. Did he want to delight in them? Did he love the remnant that was still there? Did he have plans for the remnant?
Yes.
Did he want to give the remnant hope? Did he want the remnant to understand that he wasn't dissatisfied with them? Yeah. Did he want to discipline the ones maybe in the middle?
Yes.
What would that be for?
Help them to change.
Yeah.
To turn back.
To turn them around, to get them back, to help them see. They were blind by these false prophets, blinded by many of them. And he needed to have understanding, or they needed to have understanding that God is here, and he loves you, and he is available to you. It is the delightful plant that God loved Israel. Thus he looked for justice. Where? In the vineyard. Yeah. He looked, he searched. It's kind of like your vineyard maybe is in trouble, but you still go out there and see if you got some fruit that may be harvestable. All right? But behold, what did he find? Bloodshed. What does bloodshed mean? Destruction, injustice, murder. The understanding that there were people who would take a bribe to even have someone go to jail or be murdered. Does that anger you? It should. Injustice should anger us. Justice is what we should be about, because this is exactly what God was about. He looked for righteousness. What did he find? Yeah. He found depression, people being depressed by other people. He found cries throughout the land that God come and fix it and take care of it. Brian.
I had a note, and it makes more sense to me now what you just mentioned, that the Hebrew word for justice and bloodshed sound almost identical.
You do? Yes.
And that's what one of the notes I had in my Bible here. And so, yeah, bloodshed and justice, the word sounds almost identical. So he saw injustice.
The vineyard had produced a justice that to God was bloodshed. Now, how was that? Because it was an unjust justice. They were favoring the rich over the poor. They were giving advantage to those who would lie over those who would tell the truth. They were taking every advantage in their injustice to take advantage of those that may have been just and simply wanted to live in a just land. We have any of that going on today? Yeah, I think we do. Unfortunately, a lot of it. Was the nation healthy? No, it was very unhealthy. We're out of time. Thank you very much for your kind attention.